Welcome along to Curious About Our Planet, a live and online digital festival here at Glasgow Science Centre. My name's Gillian and I'm really excited to be here today as we are going to be joined by Fran, Emily, Charlotte, Mal and Kevin from the Scottish Seabird Centre, and they will be taking your questions about Scotland's amazing marine animals. We're going to watch a short introductory video about the centre and then we will be joining them live. So if you do have any questions or anything you'd like to ask and you have joined us live on Friday morning, please send them through to us now via YouTube and we will ask as many as we can. For just now, enjoy a short introduction to the centre and we will see you afterwards to join with all our experts.
The Scottish Seabird Centre is a conservation and education charity based in North Berwick. We connect people to the marine environment through our visitor experience, education and volunteering initiatives, inspiring them to act for nature and support conservation projects. Our Discovery Experience and Education Hub welcome thousands of people each year, where we help them to explore, understand and connect with marine habitats and wildlife. We also work out on some of the amazing seabird islands along the local coastline to protect and restore marine habitats for the wildlife that lives there. Scotland is home to some incredible marine wildlife, from puffins and gannets to dolphins and hermit crabs. Climate change has been identified as one of the biggest threats to Scotland's seas and the marine environment around the world. Found at the top of the marine food web, seabirds can tell us a lot about life below the waves. In just 25 years, the temperature in the North Sea has risen by 1 degree Celsius, a change which has already negatively impacted some of our amazing species of breeding seabirds. For example, the UK's kittiwake population has declined by 70% since 1986 due to the reduced availability of sand eels, which are a key source of food during the breeding season. In turn, sand eels are disappearing due to dramatic changes in their plankton diet. Now, although we can already see some of the negative impacts of climate change in marine environments, marine ecosystems actually hold huge potential in helping to tackle climate crisis, both here in Scotland and around the world. If effectively protected and restored, marine ecosystems can lock away more carbon than ecosystems on land. Here at the Scottish Seabird Centre, we want more people to connect with our marine wildlife and habitats, recognise the pressure that they are under, and understand the actions that can be taken on a global and local scale to safeguard these amazing wild places for generations to come.
Excellent stuff. What a lovely introductory video. So welcome along to all our schools and also a huge welcome to our experts today. We've got Fran, Charlotte, Mal, Emily and Kevin joining us today. So quite a busy session. Good morning and welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. We do have quite a lot to get through and we'd love to hear all the information that you have for us. So we will get started with our first question. Quite a biggie to start with. Can you introduce us to how amazing and diverse Scotland's marine environment is?
Yes. Hi, it's Kevin here. Hello. Absolutely, yeah. Scotland is fantastic. I think we all know that because we're here, obviously, and we all like to love where we live. But basically, because of where we are fantastic. We're right on the edge. We've got the Arctic Ocean up there. We've got the Atlantic coming in. We've got the Gulf Stream coming in. And that means that Scotland's marine environment is really uniquely placed to actually host more life than pretty much most other places. So our biodiversity in Scotland's waters, and they stretch way out, all the way out to Rockall, far out there. And essentially that means we've got so much life, 6,500 different types of species, all being registered and understood, and basically we've got a great understanding of where we're at. Now, one of the other things to think about when we look at Scotland, we like to think we're a small country, but we're really not. We're a fantastically large country. In fact, we're so large that if you turn all of our coastline, and we've got over 900 odd islands, and we're a full third of the UK landmass, so if you turn all of that into one big long straight line, it goes 18,000 kilometres, which is a mind-bogglingly large number. But when you actually think about it, that means that if you went in a big long straight line, well, we'd all have to get really good at balancing if we were going to do that. But let's just imagine for a second that we turned it into one big long straight line, and it would go from the north of Scotland all the way to Australia. So that's fantastic. I mean, what a big country. And that means that you've got tons and tons of space. And all that space is brilliant habitat, because where we are, you've got fantastic waters that are just so rich and available for life to happen. And that's just exactly what happens around about Scotland's shores. You've got loads of things. You've got the biggest kelp forests in Europe. You've got more seaweed and everything growing around about our shores. Now that's important, because basically that oxygenates the water, and we've got really, really oxygen-rich waters, which means you've got tons of life. And the marine environment, generally speaking, is incredibly important, not just to the things under the water, but to us as well. Because every time we breathe, every second breath we take, it's calculated, comes from the ocean, and oxygen created from the ocean environment, marine environment. So that means that what's out there, the fact that we've got so much of it, is brilliant, because we're punching way above our weight in terms of what we're producing for the planet. And we've got all this life down there, and there's just tons of it. There's so many different types of habitats around about Scotland as well. We've got huge mud flats in the Solway. We've got massive salt marshes all around about the place, in the Forth particularly. We've got huge, in fact, everybody's been to the beach, hopefully at some point in their life. Scotland's got over 70% of all the sandy beaches in the whole of the United Kingdom. So we're really brilliant. Fantastic number of different things going on. Also, all of that is brilliant for the economy as well, because basically Scotland's economy really, really relies round about tourism. So, and marine environmental tourism is a blossoming industry, because people come here, they want to see stuff, they want to go and experience all this. And we've got fantastic things. Hey, it's a bit unfashionable, but we've even got tons of oil rigs out there in the North Sea. But that's even brilliant for the marine environment too, because hey, that creates a reef environment where loads of other things can grow and live. So it's brilliant. I mean, there's so much going on around about Scotland's shores and in our marine environment. We've even got some of the biggest coral reefs, believe it or not. Hey, that people think coral reef, they think Australia, Great Barrier Reef. Well, in Scotland, we've got cold coral reefs, cold water coral reefs, and we've got some of the biggest in Europe, really important ones out there in the west of Scotland, off the Western Isles. We've got massive, massive coral reefs that have been there, they think, for over 4,000 years. I mean, that is mind-boggling. Now, all of that's not just important because of all the things that live there, and hey, that creates a massively brilliant habitat for life to grow, and specific species to just basically use it for breeding. But also, it's carbon capture. Our marine environment, the biggest place on the planet for carbon capture is the seabed. So that means that you've basically got tons going on around about Scotland that add to that, because of these huge big coral reefs and all of that kelp forest and all of the seaweed banks going on all round about Scotland, in amongst all our unique habitats, poking in about all of the ins and outs of our coastline, which it stretches all the way to Australia. So that's more space than anywhere else, pretty much. So it's brilliant.
I think that really in depth, and I have to say, such an inspiring answer. We are a wee country, but there's an absolute huge amount going on, and I think that excellently leads into the next question. What is the biggest threat to our marine life?
Hi, so I can answer this one, I think. I'm Emily, I'm the Conservation Officer here at the Scottish Seabird Centre. So that means I get to spend lots of time out and about along the coast and out on the islands here in the Firth of Forth, taking action to protect the habitats that are so important for the amazing wildlife that Kevin described just there. But unfortunately, as a lot of you will already know, our oceans are under threat. And there's lots of threats that impact our ocean, including things like pollution that we talk about a lot. So we talk about plastics a lot, and things like plastic straws that end up in the sea and cause all sorts of problems for our marine wildlife. So that can be big plastics, and that can be really, really tiny plastics as well, microplastics and nurdles that end up in the marine food chain. There's activities linked to fishing and how we get our food from the ocean that can be really damaging as well. So that includes kind of overfishing and maybe using some unsustainable fishing methods that maybe damage the environment as well as catching the fish. And bycatch as well. So bycatch is where a fisherman accidentally catches something in his net, or his or her net, that he didn't mean to. So that might be birds, that might be whales or dolphins that they accidentally end up catching. So that can cause damage to the marine environment. And then there's things like invasive species as well. Now, invasive species is just an animal or a plant that ends up somewhere where it shouldn't be. And because it's not supposed to be there naturally, it can cause all sorts of problems and upset the balance within some of the habitats. But I would say the biggest threat to the marine environment is, of course, climate change. And that can cause problems in all sorts of ways, including meaning that the sea temperatures are rising, and that the sea levels are rising, and that the chemistry in the ocean is changing, which means that it's very difficult for some of the species that rely on things staying the same or moving very, very slowly to adapt fast enough to survive. So that includes birds like, there's a bird called the kittiwake that lives here off the coast of Scotland. And in the UK, because of climate change, the kittiwake has declined by about 70% since the 1980s. So we're seeing lots and lots of kittiwakes just not being able to survive the same way that they used to be because of the way that the environment's changing.
I think that's a really important point to make. We had the information from Kevin there about what our environment is like and all the amazing stuff that we have in this country, but there are changes happening that we have to consider today. Excellent stuff. Thank you for that. So this does relate to what we have just been speaking about, but what are the effects of climate change in relation to Scottish sea life?
Yeah. Hi. So I'm Charlotte. I'm the Marine Engagement Officer at the Scottish Seabird Centre. So my job is to go out and tell people about Scottish marine life away from North Berwick, away from the centre where we're physically based, and go further afield in Scotland. So part of that is talking about, unfortunately, the impacts of climate change on our wonderful marine life. And as Emily's mentioned, there's unfortunately quite a wide variety of impacts that climate change is having. An increase in temperature in the atmosphere leads to an increase in temperature in the ocean. And as that video stated at the beginning there, the North Sea has seen a change of about 1 degree Celsius in about 25 years, which doesn't sound like a lot. We think of 1 degree and we think, that won't have much of an impact on us. But marine life is actually very susceptible and sensitive to changes in the temperature. So even that 1 degree C change has unfortunately led to changes in distribution of species. So for example, some warmer loving species like seahorses and sardines and squid have actually started to move up the country. So they're now starting to be seen in waters they haven't been seen before, which is good for them, but not so great for the colder loving species that are unfortunately now being pushed away out of their natural habitat because of those warmer species. So species like cod, which we often like to have on our plates with fish and chips, they're a cold loving species and are now getting pushed further back up towards the Arctic. It's actually causing disruption to food chains as well. So plankton, which are the tiny microscopic animals that get drifted about with ocean currents, are actually now getting changed. The number and different types of species are changing around the UK as well. And I've got a photograph here of one species. There we go. Now, this strange looking creature is something called a copepod. And this has been a magnified photograph. They are actually between about 2 millimeters and a centimeter in size. So this is a much, much bigger photograph than they are in real life. But copepods are the start of a food chain, and they are food for lots and lots of different animals in the ocean, like fish and also the seabirds later on as well. So the copepods are actually changing. Warmer loving copepods are now being seen more frequently in UK waters compared to the usual types of copepod that we saw before climate change. This is causing a change because the types of copepod there that are usually eaten by fish aren't there anymore. So there's less food for the fish, which unfortunately means, like Emily was saying, less food for some of the other animals as well, like this lovely puffin here that has got a mouthful of sand eels. Now, sand eels really like to feed on those copepods, so a decrease in copepods means a decrease in the sand eels. And I've actually got a nice craft to show, which you can do at home. This is a resource that we have on the Scottish Seabird Centre website, and it nicely shows the food chain in action. So as you can see here, there's an outline of a puffin, which has eaten a sand eel inside its stomach, and inside there are plankton, which the fish has eaten. So if you imagine removing the special types of plankton that the fish like to eat, there'll no longer be any fish for the puffin to eat, and they'll have empty stomachs. And that is why, as Emily mentioned, we're seeing a decrease in the number of seabirds around the UK. But climate change is also causing the chemistry of the oceans to change as well. And as more carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels, that excess carbon dioxide gets dissolved into the water in the ocean, and that actually becomes an acid. So very, very slowly, the acidity of the ocean is actually changing. It's becoming more acidic, not like an acid you think of that would burn your skin straight away. It's not that strong, but very, very subtle change in that level of acidity unfortunately causes shells to break down. It causes eggs to break down, which unfortunately makes animals and different species more vulnerable to other threats like pollution, and their survival rate isn't as good as well. So there's a huge variety of impacts. There's also things I haven't mentioned, such as increase in storms, which is causing obviously impacts on seabird colonies. When big waves come crashing into the coast, you'll get excess fresh water coming off of melting ice caps. So it is a large problem, and certainly something that needs to change.
I think something that we've touched on in every session we've done in the last few days is just the balance that we have on our Earth. And every ecosystem, all the biodiversity we have, if one thing is affected, then the whole thing is affected. So certainly a good point to cover at the moment. We'll continue on with the next question. So thank you for that. The next question coming up should be on the screen at the moment. Yeah, excellent stuff. We've got Heather in Old Primary School, and they would like to know, we've touched a lot on the diversity we have in Scotland, but what are the 5 most unusual animals found in Scotland's marine environment?
Ooh. I have one to start. I don't know if everyone has one each, or we can do a couple, but I've certainly got one. I think my favourite unusual one is something called a sailor by the wind, which is like, it looks like a jellyfish. By the wind sailor, sorry. It looks like a jellyfish, but it's actually not. It's actually a colony of individual animals that has a sort of a top to it that looks like a jellyfish and tentacles that hang down. But it's not. It's individual animals all kind of connected up to make a colony. And they move around the world's oceans by this sort of gigantic, almost jelly-like flap, which they use to catch the wind to move around the coast. And they're seen in British waters sort of between around September time and onwards in the summer months. So they're really bizarre, and you can sometimes see them washed up on beaches.
So I'm going to stay on brand and go with the seabird. One of my favourite seabirds is called the great skua. We get them in the north of Scotland and along the west coast, and they are super cool. So people call them they get this nickname called the pirates of the sea, because what they do is they do hunt for themselves sometimes, but they have this great technique of chasing after other seabirds that have just caught something delicious. So, you know, even big ones like gannets or gulls, or, you know, it can be anything. And they'll harass them relentlessly. They'll kind of keep flying at them, keep flying around them, until they can get them to either regurgitate or drop the food that they're carrying, and they eat it themselves. So they do this great job of, they don't have to hunt the food for themselves. All they do is steal it from others, and they're amazing to watch. So they're big brown birds, and you might see them soaring around kind of the north coast or the west coast of Scotland if you're ever visiting that area.
Nice. I like their style.
Hi, I would like to continue the seabird theme, but my favourite seabird is the fulmar, especially the fulmar chick, mainly because it has one self-defense mechanism that is very disgusting but very cool. It vomits on anything. So when mum and dad are coming down to give it a little bit of feed, the fulmar chick just goes right in, and it can vomit all over it. Now this is a very nasty sick. It has acids and enzymes and lots of disgusting gooey things that you would find in lots of different mouths. But if another seabird gets this goo on it, it loses its ability to waterproof itself. So it can't go in the water anymore. And if you're unlucky to get this orangey, vomity, sick or mess on you, it's a bit, the smell is so bad, it's a bit like ammonia and really bad off meat. If you got it on your jacket, and then you put your jacket in the washing machine and washed your jacket and then brought it out, it would still smell. If you took that jacket, put it in a poly bag, put it outside for about another week or so, took the jacket out, it would still smell. It's a very, very bad smelling vomit, but it's a very effective defense mechanism. So not even the sort of the main predator birds that we do have in the area stay clear of the fulmar chick, because it literally goes, it will vomit on anything, and we mean mum, dad, any other birds that are close by, anything at all. So that's my favourite and unusual.
That's a lovely descriptive answer you gave us there, Mal. Thank you for that. So yeah, if we have another two unusual animals left, I think. Yeah.
Oh, go on,
Sorry.
Fran. Yeah, there we go.
Hi,
Fran.
everybody. I'm Fran. I'm the Education Officer here at the Scottish Seabird Centre, and I'm going to continue the theme of seabirds. The unusual seabird that I'd like to tell you about is the Arctic tern. It travels further than any other bird, so it'll breed up in the Arctic, and then it'll spend its winter down in the Antarctic. But here in the Isle of May is where they'll have their chicks, and you have to be very careful, because if you're on the island and you get too close to one of the chicks, the Arctic tern will fly up and come down and give you a peck right on top of your head. So for me, that's one of the standout birds, and it's got one of the furthest migrations out of any animals on the planet.
Excellent. So I think we have one more unusual creature. There we go, Kevin. Thank you.
Hi there. I'm going to go a bit off-piste at the moment and talk about something that maybe lots of people don't realise we've got around about Scotland, and it's turtles, leatherback turtles. Now, I think they're fantastic. They're the biggest turtle in the world. They're huge and massively heavy, but when they're in the water, they can come a great distance. And when I was talking earlier, I talked about a thing called the Gulf Stream. Now, that's warm water that comes up and over Scotland, all the way from the Caribbean. And that's where you get leatherback turtles laying their eggs. And they like to come to Scotland during the summer months. And they love Scotland so much because we've got so many jellyfish. Now, I bet everybody has at some point or other been in the sea and been chased out because a whole load of jellyfish turn up. And nobody likes being stung by jellyfish. So the fact that leatherback turtles eat nothing other than jellyfish is fantastic. And I think it's a brilliant thing. And I don't want climate change to change things too much, because it might switch off the Gulf Stream, and that would be bad news, because then we get even more jellyfish, and none of us would be happy swimming around and getting stung all the time, because that would be rubbish. So I think the leatherback turtle is fantastic. More of it, please. Thank you.
No, excellent. I think some lovely conversations there about some of the environmental creatures that I weren't aware we had in this country. And again, sorry, the one that's going to stick in my head is the vomiting one. I don't think I'll ever get that. I can even smell it. I can smell it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We have another question coming in from Liberton Primary School, and they would like to know, are there any species of shark that live in Scottish seawater?
Yeah.
So I think Charlotte's going to take that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can take that one. So surprisingly, yes, a lot of people don't actually think of sharks being in colder waters. They think of like the great white shark, you know, off in much, much warmer waters. But we do have some species, some that are here more times of the year than others. Some are visitors. They'll come here maybe in the summer months and then go elsewhere around the country, around the world, and others will be here all year round. We do get a variety of ones living in different habitats. So we'll get the basking shark, which is actually the second largest fish on the planet, which is incredible to think that we get those off of Scottish waters. They can grow to about 9 meters in length, and they don't feed in the same way that other sharks do feed, however. They don't have any teeth. So how they feed is they open their mouth completely wide open and they filter any plankton. So that little copepod photograph that I showed you, they'll filter that and other lots of little animals and plants in the water through the water column, through these kind of ridges in their mouth. They'll filter all those tiny, tiny, tiny creatures. So even though they're the second biggest fish on the planet, they feed on plankton. So completely safe, and they may look a bit scary, but they're not at all. They're completely safe and won't harm humans. So basking sharks, fantastic. They're seen in the Scottish seas in the summer months. But we also get sharks, believe it or not, in our deepest, coldest waters. So Scotland actually has some deep seas, quite far off of the coast. And in there, we have something called the Greenland shark. Now, it doesn't just live in Greenland, which is why it can also live off the coast of Scotland. And that is actually the longest living vertebrate known to be alive on the planet. So vertebrate is something with a backbone, just like us, and it can live to between 250 to 400 years. So that's an amazing species of shark that we've only sort of started to know more about as technology has advanced. So between the Greenland shark and the basking shark, there's lots of other species there as well. We get things like dogfish that can be seen around rocky shores or further off sort of the intertidal areas as well, which are much smaller, but just as magnificent and just as important to the marine ecosystem as well.
I think you raised quite an interesting point there, that we have the ocean goes to such a depth that there's still a lot we are discovering as technology gets better. So yeah, there's a lot more going on underneath than we can see. So thank you for that. We have another question coming up. Townhill Primary and Heatherly Knoll Primary, they would both like to know, how does plastic in the ocean affect marine life? And has it caused any animals to become endangered? It's quite a big question, if anyone. There we go. Thank you, Emily, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, I can do my best to answer this one. So as I mentioned earlier, I spend a lot of my time out on the beaches around North Berwick and further afield as well, doing litter picks and doing nurdle hunts, so surveying for tiny, tiny bits of plastic. And just taking lots of actions to try and reduce the amount of plastic and other marine debris that arrives in our marine environment. And the reason that we want to do that is because plastics and kind of big bits of marine debris can cause problems for all sorts of reasons. But the main two are probably entanglement. So entanglement is where any kind of creature, from very small ones to very big ones, can get all caught up in a piece of plastic or a piece of rope or a piece of fishing gear or anything that ends up in the marine environment that shouldn't be there. And then it either really prevents them from living properly and being able to feed properly, or sometimes, really sadly, it causes them to die, especially for creatures that breathe air and get caught up under the water. It can cause them huge problems. So animals like whales and dolphins and seabirds that need to get back up to the surface to breathe, if they get caught up under the water, then it can cause them huge, huge problems because they won't be able to get to the surface to breathe. So entanglement causes big problems. And also ingestion. So this can happen with all sorts of bits of plastic and other litter as well. And ingestion is where an animal eats the plastic or eats kind of the other bit of litter, and it all gathers up in its stomach because they've confused it for food. And what happens is then that builds up in their stomach, and it makes them feel really full. and there's no space then for real food, for normal food, and they're then not able to survive. So it can cause big problems for our marine wildlife, and yeah, definitely for our seabirds as well.
I think something I saw recently on the news as well, obviously 2020, for absolute vital health reasons, we have all been using PPE, absolutely essential for us all at the moment. But again, we're now beginning to see the impact of things like gloves and masks, more single-use plastic washing up. So certainly something, like you said, you do litter picking. I know that's been a huge part of that clear up. But again, something we're probably going to hear a lot more about in kind of coming months. So thank you for answering that question for the schools there. We have another one coming up. So I'm not sure if you all want to have a go at this one, or want to take your turns, but how and why did you get into the role that you do have now?
Go first. My name is Mel Watson. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the Science Communicator. I do the sort of live science, from everything from disgusting to explosions, to make science as nice and as fun as possible. How I got into that role is I went to university to study applied physics and engineering, and it was too wordy. I liked playing with experiments. So what I did is I went to a performance college, and then after I left that, I joined the Edinburgh International Science Festival as a science communicator. I spent my first 3 to 4 years doing science shows all around Scotland. I think I came to every single school in Scotland, because I started in 2001 and I stopped touring in about 2012. And from then on, I became a sort of international. For about a few years, I toured globally. I went to the New Zealand Science Festival and the Abu Dhabi Science Festival, and then I was offered a science communication job at the Scottish Seabird Centre in 2013, as they needed someone to make science a little bit more interesting, because a lot of people think seabirds or marine life, it's very doom and gloom. So they needed to show things of a lighter nature, and then that was my job. So I used different types of experiments and goo and slime to make science fun, and my job can be to help teachers in primary schools and secondary schools to make science more fun and interesting. So that's how I got into my job.
Excellent, thank you so much. I think we might have time for another couple of answers for that one. There we go, Kevin, thank you.
Hi there. Like Mal, I forgot to introduce myself properly. I'm Kevin. I work in the discovery experience at the Seabird Centre, working with visitors and also with Mal, doing some communication, basically. Now, you don't naturally fall into that job. So I started out with a big interest in Scottish history, which I went to university originally to study, and then I decided that I really liked also talking about these sorts of things, and also about behavioural science, about why people decide to do things, what makes people do things. So I then went into marketing and became a project manager, and basically spent a lot of time working in that field, discovering how to communicate properly and get the desired outcome from your communication, which in part of what I was doing, I mean, everybody's drank Iron Brew. I used to work in a company that actually did the marketing and adverts for Iron Brew. So it can be quite fun. Yeah. But also I had a big interest in nature and science as well. And so I decided, after doing that for a long while, that I would really like to do something that, wasn't just, basically doing it for the man. So I went and decided to study environmental stuff, and I went to the Agricultural College up in Aberdeen, and I did environmental management, and I studied that. And essentially, after I finished doing that, I was looking for work, obviously, and I happened upon the Seabird Centre, where I started volunteering. And essentially, then I was offered a position working alongside Mal. So basically it's fantastic, and you get the chance to actually really communicate properly with people about things like what we've been talking about, seabirds and the marine environment, and about global climate change, and all the things that are massively important about how we're going to live in the future and how we breathe, because that's important. Yes.
No, absolutely. And I think another great example of, maybe not taking the direct or traditional route, but still absolutely getting vital information across. I believe we're going to hear from Fran next.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so when I left school, I went to university and I studied marine biology. I then decided I wanted to become an English teacher. So I actually moved to Vietnam and I started teaching English over there. And I realized somewhere along the path there that actually what I wanted to teach people about was what I was really passionate about, which is the marine environment. So much like Kevin, I actually started off at the Seabird Centre as a volunteer, helping with our weekly wildlife clubs. And now 4 years later, I am our education officer. So we have school trips that come in during the week. As I mentioned, we've got a weekly wildlife club, and we do fantastic activities during the summer holidays as well. So I feel very, very fortunate that I've been able to come into a role where I get to teach something that I am so passionate about.
And I think certainly that's something that's come across from all of you is the passion and the care you have for the subject. And hopefully anyone watching at home or around the world gets an idea of what you can do. If you enjoy what you do, and you can certainly get a fantastic role. So thank you so much. We are going to move on to the next question. This is from Golden Hill Primary 7A, and they would like to know, how do you handle aggressive or angry birds and animals? Oh, we've got a hand straight up there. There we go, Emily. Thank you.
I can answer this one because I do spend a lot of time out on the Bass Rock, and I think that's a perfect place to practice if you want to practice dealing with aggressive or angry birds.
Yeah.
Because not because the gannets are the bad guys at all, but because when we go onto the Bass Rock, of course, we're going into their habitat, their territory, and quite rightly, they want to try and protect their babies, their young, their nests, and themselves from what they perceive as a threat. So that's us. But you do have to be very careful. So gannets have very, very sharp beaks, and they're very big. They're the UK's largest seabird. So you have to be incredibly, incredibly careful where you're putting your legs. And it's more about basically trying not to get too much in the way. So we try and stay out of the way as possible. Sometimes we do get injured seabirds brought into the centre. Now, we're not a rescue centre. So it's the SSPCA are the ones to call if you do find an injured seabird or any kind of wild animal around Scotland. But because we're called the Seabird Centre, sometimes people will bring them in. So when we have to kind of handle them and we don't have a choice to get a wee bit closer, we have to be super, super careful. So I would say never, ever try and approach a cross seabird or an angry seabird if you do find one along the coast, because their beaks can be very sharp and you have to kind of handle them in the right way and have the right equipment to do that safely.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting point as well. We're chatting about environments and ecosystems and, what human behaviour has maybe done or processes it sped up. And I think it's good to remember that, that's their habitat and their home. So if you do have to help, just do it as carefully and respectfully as possible. So thank you so much. Hopefully not something you have to come across too often. But we do have another question coming in. Hi Blantyre would like to know how much the population of fish in Scottish waters has been affected by both overfishing and pollution. I wonder if this is a question again for Fran, perhaps.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So here where we are at the Seabird Centre, we've got the Firth of Forth. I'm just outside my window, just there. And it is, we do have overfishing globally. We're very, very fortunate here in the Forth that we have got really quite healthy sort of fish stocks. And so for a lot of our animals, for instance, like a gannet, they've got a really wide range that they can cover. So if they do need to go a little bit further to forage food, they can do. I think one of the main things in terms of population of fish that have been affected by pollution, sorry, I'll just lean back behind me here. There here we go. So just here, I have a pipefish. And this little, there we go, I hope you can all see it just here. You can see it's quite a long fish just here. And when Emily was talking earlier about sand eels, and I know Charlotte had a lovely picture there of the puffin with the sand eels in their mouth, due to global warming, unfortunately, they're following their food source and going further north. And one of the species that we're having here instead is the pipefish. Now, I've got a puffin behind me as well, and you can see the size of this is a very, very large fish. And trying to feed that to a baby puffling, which is what we call a baby puffin, can be very, very difficult. This is also a cartilaginous fish, a bit like your nose and your ears, or a shark. And so it's not got the nutritional value that they would usually get from the sand eels. So that has been a real problem. But as I say, they are able to, gannets and things will go to the same areas again and again to forage. But they are very fortunate that they have got that slightly bigger range to be able to do that. Here in the Forth, most of our fishing tends to be for crustaceans, which is more the sort of diet of seals and things like that. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything to that one. Yeah.
Hi there, Fran. Everybody. Just wondered if people might have heard of a fish called the herring. Basically, it was a really popular food in the 19th century and into the 20th century. And just when you're talking about overfishing, basically that's our very own live example of what happens when you overfish. Because essentially what happened was everybody who was anybody in the fishing fleet would come to Scotland in the 19th century, and they would come for herring because there were so many of them, and people thought they were called the silver darlings. And essentially, everybody thought, well, there's so many of them, they'll never, ever, ever go away, and we'll just keep getting loads and loads of them. So the fishing boats got bigger and bigger, the nets got tighter and tighter, and just huge. And then eventually, because people stopped going, but even because people stopped going to church as much, it meant that they were fishing 7 days a week. And that meant that fish got no respite, no chance to breed. And essentially what happened was they collapsed the herring stock. They ended up killing them all off because they ate them all. And that meant that we ended up with no herring shoals in and around the coast of Scotland pretty much anymore. And so the fishing fleets all ended up collapsing, and loads of people lost their jobs. So it's basically shooting yourself in the foot by overfishing. But it's just people thinking about money in their pocket today and not the long-term thing about, hey, let these guys have babies or else there won't be any in the future. So that's what happens with overfishing, and that's an example of what happened around about Scotland.
And I think something we've touched on in previous sessions is certainly, thinking in the short term, what do we need now? But actually the implications that has for the future. And that actually does bring us on to our very last question. Hopefully, Mala's back with us. It would be good to get an answer in the last few minutes from each of you on this one. COP26 is round the corner. It's arriving in the city very, very soon. And I just wondered, what do you hope COP26 can achieve? If you'd just like to take it in turns.
Yeah, I can take this one first. I think it would be great when all of these world leaders and government representatives and businesses and individuals from all over the world get together to have this big old conversation about climate change and how we can work together to tackle it. We've just got to, I think, hope that some meaningful actions come from these talks that kind of result into really meaningful changes for the way that we live and how we impact, not just on wildlife, like we've been talking about today, but of course, we're having a massive impact on other people around the world as well, by not taking this decisive action to tackle climate change. So for me, I just really hope that some meaningful actions come from these talks.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Hi. Sorry. So I think, again, agreeing with Emily, I'd like to see people working together to enable and encourage, countries that are affected by climate change. So even if there's perhaps a country out there that isn't directly affected, it's about us all pulling together, because we're all in this together. So perhaps we can help to, protect some of the ecosystems in other countries where they may not have the resources to. Perhaps we can lend a helping hand there, and as I say, work together to get to a solution.
Excellent. I think, Kevin, your hand was up next. Thank you.
Hi there. Yeah, I think everybody's heard of Greta Thunberg, and I think she said it quite well. She wants to get rid of the blah, 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 essentially. Everybody, essentially, these things always goes blah, 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 and we will do this, we will do that, and oh, yes, yes, yes. And then next year, we're still talking about it, and we're still getting the blah, blah, blah. So I'm hoping very much that we get rid of that blah, blah, blah. And actually, as everybody has said, we see something concrete happen, because as David Attenborough said, we're kind of staring down the barrel of the gun now. Essentially, we no longer have that space or luxury to keep just churning through the chat on it. We've actually got to get down to do the nitty gritty and change stuff, because there's actually cities about to disappear under the water. Jakarta is one of them, and that's going to disappear underwater because of rising seawater, and that's part of global warming. So we really need to actually do something, or else people are going to lose their homes big style. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. That's great, Charlotte.
And I can completely agree with the comments that have just been said as well. Action needs to be happening. It needs to change from whether can we do it to we need to do it. Let's do it. But also, what I hope COP26 does is not have just this massive kind of statement of it's all doom and gloom. It's too much for us to do. It needs to be a positive. There needs to be, yes, we can do it. As Fran says, we need to come together. And I think for us as the Science Centre and as a place for communicating this with the public, it's about how people can do their bit, because everybody actually really can do their bit to make a difference. So I really hope COP26 inspires people to engage and to also do their bit for the planet as well.
Excellent. And finally, Mal, what's your thoughts?
I hope that COP26, because it's in Glasgow, inspires a whole generation of Scottish children and schools to start writing to their politician, to start making decisions, to actually do start actions. Politicians are very good at talking, but not very good at saying a date and a time for action. Whereas most Scottish children that I know of are good at beach cleans, are litter pickers, and things like that. So not only do the action that you can help with your class, your school, or at home, but also give yourself a voice. Start talking. Talk to your teachers. Talk to your parents. Talk to your politicians. Hopefully, COP26 will make you more vocal, and hopefully, the people that make the decisions will listen to you.
Yeah, I think fingers crossed. I think you've all covered that really well, introduced us to our amazing environment, but also brought together the thought that it's time to do something. And, children or anyone watching today, you do have the chance to do that now, and we have to do that now. So thank you so much for everything you've told us today. This session will be online. There was quite a lot in it, so feel free to log back onto our site and watch it back. It's been a pleasure having you all, so thank you so much. If you do have a few minutes and you are watching at home, please fill out our online survey. It'll help to shape the future of these kind of events. But again, thank you to all of you joining us today. Thank you for everyone watching at home or around the world or at school, and for those amazing questions. Enjoy the rest of the day. Please log on to our website. It'll tell you the other sessions we have up on our final day of Curious About Our Planet. My name's Gillian, and it's goodbye for just now from Glasgow Science Centre.